My phone buzzed at 9:42 p.m. She said, "I'm at my sister's. Don't wait." I replied, "I'm not alone either." She thought I was bluffing. That was her first mistake. The house felt different when Clara wasn't around to fill it with her constant noise. The endless stream of reality TV shows where rich people pretended to have problems. Phone conversations with friends I'd never met about drama I didn't understand. Complaints about coworkers whose names changed every few months like characters in a soap opera she couldn't stop watching. I sat in my leather recliner, the one she always complained about because it didn't match her carefully curated Pinterest vision of our living room, and stared at the text message glowing on my phone screen like a confession. 3 months of marriage counseling with Dr. Richardson, a woman who charged $200 an hour to tell us we needed to communicate better. 2 years of increasingly distant conversations that felt like business meetings between strangers who happened to share a mortgage. 18 months of sleeping in the same bed while living completely separate lives. Passing each other in hallways like polite roommates who split utilities but never shared meals. And this is what it came down to. A lie wrapped in 11 carefully chosen words, delivered with the casual cruelty that only someone who truly knows you can manage. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Ethan Pierce, 38 years old, and I install security systems for people who don't trust their neighbors, their employees, their housekeepers, or their own family members. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days helping paranoid rich people spy on their domestic staff and gardeners, while living with someone I couldn't trust to tell me the truth about where she bought her morning coffee. But tonight, everything would change. Tonight, the careful, methodical man she'd grown tired of would remind her exactly why Marines don't make idle threats, and why underestimating your opponent is the fastest way to lose everything you think you control. Clara thought she was clever. Marketing consultants usually do. They believe they can manipulate anyone with the right combination of words, perfect timing, and strategic pauses that make you question your own perception of reality. She'd been practicing these techniques on me for years, slowly convincing me that my concerns were paranoia, my questions were accusations, and my desire for basic honesty was somehow unreasonable and controlling. What she didn't know was that her husband had been a Marine for 8 years before he started wiring houses for paranoid millionaires who wanted to watch their staff through hidden cameras. What she'd forgotten was that Marines are taught to observe everything, document patterns, and strike with overwhelming precision when the time is right. She'd mistaken my patience for weakness, my silence for ignorance, my willingness to give her space for stupidity. Tonight, she'd learned the difference between those things. I poured myself a glass of the expensive Cabernet Sauvignon she'd bought 6 months ago for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. We'd been saving this $150 bottle for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to celebrate something worth celebrating. A promotion that never came. An anniversary that felt more like a business meeting. A reconciliation that required one of us to admit fault. The wine tasted like victory, though I hadn't won anything yet. I opened my laptop and pulled up the tracking software I'd installed on our shared family plan 6 months ago when Clara's behavior had become impossible to ignore, and her explanations had stopped making any logical sense. Her iPhone showed up as a blue dot on the digital map, parked outside the Marriott downtown on 5th Street. Room charges $300 a night, valet parking, room service that cost more than most people spent on groceries, the same hotel she'd been visiting every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 weeks. The same hotel that was definitely, absolutely, provably not her sister Ivy's 1-bedroom apartment in the nursing district across town. I scrolled through weeks of location data, building a timeline that would make any detective proud and any prosecutor salivate. Tuesday nights at the Marriott from 7:30 to 11:45 p.m. with clockwork precision. Thursday afternoons from 2:15 to 5:30 p.m., when she claimed to be in client meetings that somehow never appeared on her work calendar. Friday lunches that lasted 3 hours at restaurants I'd never heard of, all charged to her company credit card for business development with clients who didn't seem to exist in any official capacity. My wife had been living a double life for months, and she'd gotten sloppy about covering her tracks, or maybe she'd gotten arrogant, confident that her husband was too trusting to investigate and too weak to do anything about it, even if he discovered the truth. Clara had always been beautiful in a way that opened doors and closed deals. Tall and elegant, with the kind of confidence that made people want to agree with her, even when they knew she was wrong. She'd built a successful career on charm and persuasion, convincing clients to spend money they didn't have on marketing campaigns that promised results she couldn't guarantee, but somehow never failed to deliver. The same skills that made her successful at work had made her very, very good at lying to her husband. But every system has vulnerabilities. Every lie leaves digital footprints. Every secret creates patterns that careful observation can detect, and patient documentation can prove beyond any reasonable doubt. The doorbell rang at exactly 10:08 p.m., just as I'd predicted when I'd called Ivy 2 hours earlier. I walked to the front door and opened it to find her standing there in her hospital scrubs, holding a bottle of wine and looking exhausted from another 16-hour shift at General Hospital. Dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide, blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun that suggested she'd been running between patient rooms for hours. Everything about her screaming overworked and underpaid. "Thanks for coming," I said, stepping aside to let her into the house she'd visited hundreds of times over the years, for holidays and birthdays and family gatherings that had always felt slightly forced. "When you called 2 hours ago and said Clara was using my name to cover an affair, I didn't believe you," she said, her voice quiet and strained with the kind of exhaustion that comes from working multiple jobs to pay off student loans that never seemed to get smaller. "But after I looked at those hotel receipts you forwarded, and the credit card statements, and the timeline you put together," her voice trailed off as she took in the evidence I'd spread across our kitchen table like a detective's caseboard. "She's been using your name as an alibi for months," I said, closing the door behind her and engaging the deadbolt with a click that seemed louder than usual. "Every time she tells me she's helping you through a rough patch, bringing you soup when you're sick, staying over because you're having panic attacks about work, she's actually meeting someone else." Ivy's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. My own sister. We'd been planning this confrontation for 2 weeks, ever since I'd finally gathered enough evidence to prove what I'd suspected for months, and decided I needed an ally who understood betrayal from the same source. Hotel charges on nights when Ivy was working back-to-back shifts and couldn't have needed help with anything. Restaurant bills for expensive dinners when Clara claimed she was bringing takeout to her struggling sister. Gas station purchases in neighborhoods Ivy had never visited, at times when hospital security cameras could prove she was at work. The betrayal cut both ways. Clara hadn't just been lying to her husband about her whereabouts. She'd been using her sister's identity, her financial struggles, her emotional problems, as cover for an affair that had been going on since late winter. "The worst part," Ivy said, setting down the wine bottle and pulling off her jacket to reveal arms covered in small bruises from IV needles and blood draws, "is that I actually felt guilty. She kept asking me for money, saying she was behind on rent, saying she needed help with groceries, saying her car needed repairs she couldn't afford." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from my investigation. $200 a month for the past 4 months. $800 total. Ivy's voice was flat, emotionless. "I've been eating ramen noodles and working overtime to help my sister, who didn't actually need help. Money she was spending on hotel rooms and romantic dinners with someone who makes more in a month than you make in a year. While I've been skipping meals and taking on extra shifts to help family who was lying to me, I handed Ivy one of my old Marine t-shirts, navy blue with faded yellow letters across the chest that read Seri in block capitals. Put this on. Leave your jacket on the couch, where she'll see it when she walks in. Make sure the wine glasses are visible from the front door. You really think she'll come home early? Trust me, Clara can't stand losing control of any situation. The moment she thinks I'm not sitting here alone, waiting for her like a faithful dog, she'll panic and come running home to reassert her dominance and figure out what threat she's facing. We opened both bottles of wine and sat in the kitchen, where the lighting was best, and the surveillance cameras had the clearest angles. Ivy looked around the house she'd visited for holidays and family gatherings, seeing it differently now that she knew what her sister had been doing here. The expensive furniture Clara had insisted on buying with money from bonuses I'd never seen her actually earn. The artwork that cost more than Ivy made in 2 months of nursing shifts. The designer kitchen appliances that were never used because Clara preferred to eat at restaurants that charged $50 for entree. The lifestyle that had always seemed slightly beyond our means, but that Clara somehow managed to afford through mysterious consulting work and freelance projects that never seems to have actual clients or deliverable results. How long have you known? Ivy asked, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Officially 2 months. That's when I installed the GPS tracking on her phone and started documenting everything systematically. Unofficially. I've been watching her patterns since January. New perfume that I didn't buy her and couldn't afford. Phone calls she takes in the bathroom with the water running. Sudden interest in working late on projects that supposedly don't exist in her company's database. The surveillance cameras I'd installed throughout the house for work testing were still active, connected to a military system that recorded everything to multiple secure cloud servers with automatic backup protocols. I'd been documenting Clara's behavior patterns for weeks, not for divorce court, but for something much more satisfying and permanent. Clara prided herself on being smarter than everyone around her, on being able to manipulate any situation to her advantage through charm and strategic lying. She'd built her entire adult identity around being the person who could talk her way out of anything, who could make anyone believe whatever version of reality served her purposes. Tonight, she'd learned the difference between being clever and being intelligent, between thinking you're in control and actually understanding what's happening around you. My phone buzzed with another text message. Clara again. Where are you? Your car is in the driveway, but all the lights are off downstairs. I showed Ivy the message. She's panicking. She probably drove by the house to check if I was actually here, saw the unusual lighting pattern, and realized something was different. Good. Let her panic for once instead of everyone else. I typed back carefully. In the kitchen, drinking wine with a friend who needed someone to talk to tonight. Don't hurry home on my account. Take all the time you need with whatever you're doing. The response came immediately, faster than someone should be able to type while driving. What friend? You didn't mention anyone was coming over. I don't like surprises. Instead of replying, I set the phone on the counter where Ivy could see the screen. Let Clara's imagination fill in the blanks. Let her wonder who I was with, what we were talking about, whether her carefully constructed network of lies was finally collapsing under the weight of its own complexity. Ivy and I had spent hours over the past 2 weeks going through Clara's phone records, credit card statements, social media activity, work calendar, and GPS logs. The picture that emerged was of a woman living 2 completely different lives with surgical precision and sociopathic attention to detail. The devoted wife, who complained about working late and having to attend boring client dinners, while secretly meeting her lover at expensive restaurants that charged more for appetizers than most people spent on entire meals. The caring sister who borrowed money for rent and medical emergencies that never actually happened while spending thousands on designer clothes and spa treatments. The dedicated employee who claimed to be bringing in major new clients while actually conducting a romance with someone who was supposed to be paying her company for legitimate consulting services. She's been stealing from our company, Ivy said, looking through the receipts I'd organized across our kitchen table in chronological order. Personal expenses charged to corporate accounts, hotel rooms, dinners, weekend trips, jewelry, clothes. It's not technically embezzlement, because she's been calling it client entertainment and business development, but it's definitely fraud that could result in criminal charges. And the money she borrowed from me for her supposed financial emergencies, gambling debts would be my guess, or shopping sprees she couldn't explain to me. Or maybe just funding a lifestyle that looked successful and sophisticated to her lover, while her actual husband paid all the real bills. At exactly 10:25, headlights swept across the living room window, moving too fast and at the wrong angle for someone who is in control of their emotions. A car door slammed with enough force to wake the neighbors 3 houses down. The automatic porch light triggered, illuminating Clarera's BMW parked crooked in the driveway, one wheel on the grass, like she'd been driving with shaking hands and poor judgment. "She came home early," I said. Exactly as I'd predicted 2 hours ago when I'd called Ivy. Ivy smiled for the first time all evening. Let's see how good she is at thinking on her feet when she's not controlling the narrative. When Clara burst through the front door, mascara streaming down her cheeks in dark rivers, she wasn't angry. She was terrified. The door hit the wall with enough force to rattle every picture frame in the hallway and send our wedding photos jumping against the glass. She stood frozen in the doorway for several long seconds, taking in the scene before her like a detective arriving at a crime scene where she was simultaneously the victim and the prime suspect. Her eyes moved systematically from Ivy sitting at our kitchen table wearing my old Marine t-shirt, to the 2 wine glasses on the counter with lipstick traces on the rim, to the documents spread across the surface like evidence cards in a murder trial, to my calm expression as I leaned against the counter like a man who had been expecting this exact moment for weeks. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the sudden silence. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at shadows or threats only it could perceive. But inside our house, 3 people who had been lying to each other for months were finally about to face the truth at the same time. "What is this?" Clara's voice cracked on the last word, higher and more strained than normal, carrying the kind of panic that comes when carefully constructed lies start collapsing faster than you can rebuild them. I stayed perfectly calm, leaning against the kitchen counter with my wine glass half empty, watching her try to process what she was seeing and figure out how to spin this situation to her advantage. This was Clara's greatest skill and her defining characteristic, taking any scenario, no matter how damaging to her, and finding a way to make herself the victim, the hero, or, at minimum, the person who shouldn't be blamed for whatever had gone wrong. "How was Daniel?" I asked conversationally, like I was asking about her day at the office or whether traffic had been heavy on her drive home. Her face went white so quickly, I thought she might actually faint. The color drained from her cheeks, her lips, even her earlobes, leaving her looking like someone who'd just received terminal medical news. She grabbed the door frame for support, and I noticed her hands were shaking badly enough that her car keys were making tiny metallic clinking sounds against each other. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked any conviction whatsoever. It was the voice of someone who knew they'd been caught, but hadn't yet figured out how much evidence existed against them, or how long they'd been under surveillance. Ivy stood up, slowly, deliberately, like a predator that had been waiting patiently for exactly the right moment to strike with maximum effect. She'd changed out of her hospital scrubs and into my t-shirt, but she still looked exhausted in a way that went far beyond physical tiredness. This was emotional exhaustion, the kind that comes from working multiple jobs to survive, while your sister borrows money she doesn't need to fund a lifestyle she can't afford with someone she's lying about. "I've been helping him investigate you for months, Clara," Ivy said, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it, colder than the voice she used with difficult patients or incompetent doctors. "Helping him document every lie you've told, every dollar you've stolen, every time you've used my name to cover your affair, while I worked 16-hour shifts to lend you money you didn't actually need. Investigate me." Clara's laugh sounded forced, hysterical, like someone trying to convince themselves that a joke was funny when everyone else had already moved on to more serious topics. "Investigate what?" I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not the one entertaining strange women in my kitchen while my spouse is out working to support our household. I reached into my laptop bag and pulled out a manila folder that had grown thick with documents over the past 2 months of systematic investigation. Bank statements, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, gas station purchases, phone records, GPS logs from her car's tracking system, email printouts, social media screenshots, months of evidence organized chronologically and cross-referenced to build an absolutely airtight case that would hold up in any court or corporate investigation. Hotel receipts, I said, beginning to spread the papers across the kitchen table like a dealer laying out cards in a poker game where everyone could see the hands. All charged to your company credit card. All for rooms at the Marriott downtown. All on nights when you told me you were staying at Ivy's apartment to help her through panic attacks about work stress. Those are, Clara looked at the receipts, then at Ivy, then back at me, her mind racing to find an explanation that would somehow make sense to people who hadn't been documenting her lies for months. Those are for legitimate business purposes, client meetings, confidential strategy sessions that require privacy. Really? Ivy's voice carried the kind of cold anger that nurses develop after years of dealing with patients who lie about their symptoms and family members who lie about following treatment plans. Because according to your company's internal calendar system, which Ethan somehow managed to access through his security consulting connections, you didn't have any client meetings scheduled on those dates. I smiled slightly, the first genuine expression I'd shown since Clara walked in. Amazing what IT security consultants can discover when they really want to help someone understand what's happening in their own life. Clara's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to speak, but couldn't find words that would make this situation make sense. She'd built her entire adult life around being the smartest person in any room, the one who could talk her way out of any situation through charm, strategic manipulation, and carefully constructed narratives that made her look reasonable, while making everyone else look paranoid or controlling. But she'd never faced opposition that had been planning for months, documenting everything, and building a case with the same methodical precision she used in her marketing campaigns. I opened the folder wider and pulled out specific documents, arranging them in perfect chronological order across the table like a prosecutor preparing evidence for a jury. Daniel Foster, age 42. CEO of Foster Development Group, married to Julia Foster, attorney specializing in corporate fraud. 3 children, ages 8, 12, and 15. He's been investing in your marketing campaigns for exactly 8 months, which is precisely when your affair started, according to hotel records and GPS data. Clara's phone started buzzing insistently, vibrating against her purse with the kind of urgency that suggested multiple people were trying to reach her simultaneously. She glanced at the screen, and her face somehow became even paler, which I hadn't thought was physically possible. The caller ID showed her boss's name and direct office line. "You might want to answer that," I suggested calmly, like a helpful friend offering practical advice. "It's probably important. People don't usually call at 11 o'clock at night, unless something significant has happened that requires immediate attention." She grabbed the phone with hands that were shaking so badly she almost dropped it twice before managing to swipe the screen and accept the call. The conversation lasted exactly 43 seconds. I counted, timing it on my watch like I was documenting evidence for a court case or insurance investigation. When she hung up, tears were streaming down her face, mixing with her expensive mascara to create dark tracks that made her look like she'd been in a physical fight. "They fired me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the grandfather clock and the refrigerator's hum. "Really?" I asked, finding complete surprise, while knowing exactly what had happened because I'd engineered it. Why would Pacific Marketing Group fire their supposedly top account executive? "You sent them the receipts, didn't you? You sent them documented proof that I was charging personal expenses to company accounts. You systematically destroyed my career." I nodded slowly, like someone confirming an obvious fact. Company policy specifically prohibits personal relationships with clients. Section 12 of the Employee Handbook, which you signed when you were hired 3 years ago. It also strictly prohibits billing personal expenses to corporate accounts, which is called fraud in most legal jurisdictions, and grounds for immediate termination and possible criminal prosecution. Ivy picked up another document from the table, studying it with the same careful attention to detail that made her good at spotting medical symptoms other nurses missed. This is particularly interesting, Clara. These are text messages between you and Daniel where you're claiming that Ethan is physically abusive, that he hits you, threatens you, and that you're genuinely afraid to be alone with him. Clara spun around like she'd been physically slapped. I never said that. Not exactly like that. You're taking things out of context and making them sound worse than they were. Text messages don't lie, I said, pulling out my phone and reading from the screen in the same calm, steady voice I used when explaining security system features to wealthy clients. He grabbed my wrist so hard it left bruises that lasted for days. I'm scared to go home. I think he might actually hurt me this time. I need somewhere safe to stay until I can figure out what to do about this situation. That was Clara, looked frantically between Ivy and me, her mind racing to find an explanation that would somehow make her lies sound reasonable to people who knew the truth. That was emotional truth, not literal truth. You make me feel unsafe with your constant questions and accusations and demands for explanations. Which part was emotional truth? I asked patiently. The lie about me being violent when I've never raised a hand to anyone in your presence. Or the part where you ask your lover for $10,000 to escape your imaginary abusive husband. Clara lunged toward my phone, desperation making her reckless and clumsy in a way that was completely unlike her normal, controlled demeanor. I stepped back automatically, my Marine training taking over before my conscious mind had time to process the threat she represented. She stumbled and caught herself on the kitchen counter, knocking over a wooden bowl that scattered apples and oranges across the marble floor with loud, echoing thuds. Don't, I said quietly, and something in my voice made her freeze completely in place. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was the calm, professional tone of someone who had been trained to handle much more dangerous situations than a panicking woman in an expensive dress who'd been caught lying. The footage is already uploaded to 3 separate drives, I continued, in the same conversational tone I might use to discuss the weather. One with my lawyer, one with Ivy, and one with someone else you're going to meet very soon. Clara's phone exploded with notifications like a slot machine hitting jackpot. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, Facebook messages, Instagram comments, LinkedIn connection requests. She stared at the screen like it was showing her a cancer diagnosis or court summons. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice rising to nearly a scream that echoed off the kitchen walls. "What did you send them? Who did you tell? How many people know?" "I gave you exactly what you said you wanted," I replied calmly, like someone explaining a business transaction. Freedom, independence, the chance to be with Daniel without having to sneak around and lie to everyone about it. She scrolled through her messages frantically, her breathing getting faster and more shallow with each new notification. Daniel's wife had found evidence and was asking pointed questions. Clara's mother had received copies of hotel receipts and restaurant bills and wanted detailed explanations. Her college friends were forwarding gossip and rumors they'd heard from mutual acquaintances. Her former boss had already started the paperwork to prosecute her for expense account fraud and possible embezzlement. "You destroyed my life!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the kitchen walls, loud enough to wake the neighbors and probably violate noise ordinances. "You systematically destroyed everything I worked for, everything I built, everything I cared about." "No," Ivy said, standing up from the table with the kind of controlled anger that comes from months of suppressed betrayal and financial sacrifice. "You destroyed your own life. He just made sure everyone could see what you'd been doing to people who trusted you and cared about you." Clara looked back and forth between us, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal, searching desperately for an escape route that didn't exist. For the first time in her adult life, she realized she was facing opposition that had been coordinating against her, documenting her mistakes, and planning for this exact confrontation. "You've been spying on me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, like someone who'd just realized they'd been under surveillance by people they'd trusted. "You've been tracking my phone, reading my emails, following me around like some kind of stalker." "I've been paying attention," I corrected. There's a significant difference. Spying implies you were being careful, and I had to work hard to discover your secrets. You've been leaving evidence everywhere like you wanted to get caught. Evidence of what? Love. Of finding someone who actually makes me happy. Of trying to build a relationship with someone who appreciates me and doesn't treat me like a roommate. Evidence of fraud, Ivy said, her voice flat and emotionless. Evidence of blackmail. Evidence of using your sister's identity to cover your crimes while she worked double shifts to lend you money you didn't need for emergencies that didn't exist. Clara looked at her sister like she was seeing her for the first time in years. "You're supposed to be on my side, Ivy. We're family. Family doesn't betray family like this. Family doesn't lie to family for months while stealing their identity and their money." Ivy shot back with more anger than I'd ever heard from her. Family doesn't let their sister work themselves to exhaustion while funding an affair with money they borrowed under false pretenses. Clara ran toward the front door, but stopped dead when she saw something on the hallway table that made her freeze. Like she'd seen a ghost. Her laptop bag. The expensive Italian leather one she'd bought with money she'd borrowed from Ivy 3 months ago for a supposed medical emergency. The same bag she'd left at Daniel's hotel room 4 hours earlier when she'd rushed home to deal with my unexpected text message. "How did you get this?" she asked, her voice hollow with the realization that her secrets had been compromised far more thoroughly than she'd ever imagined possible. "I have friends in hotel security," I said, like someone explaining a simple business transaction. Amazing what people will do for someone who installs their surveillance systems for free and teaches their staff how to spot credit card fraud and identity theft. She stared at the bag like it contained evidence of war crimes or terrorist activities, which, considering what was probably on that laptop, it might as well have. "Everything's on there, isn't it?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who already knew the answer. "Emails, photos, bank records, chat logs, everything." "Everything," I confirmed. Clara grabbed her car keys from the bowl by the door and ran outside into the night like someone fleeing a fire. The front door slammed so hard that the glass in the storm door cracked, creating a spiderweb pattern that would probably need to be replaced before we could sell the house. Ivy and I watched through the living room window as Clara sat in her car for 15 minutes, making increasingly frantic phone calls. Her gestures became wilder and more desperate, as each call apparently went to voicemail or was answered by people who weren't interested in helping her navigate this disaster. "She's calling Daniel," Ivy observed. "He won't answer." His wife disconnected his phone 2 hours ago when she received the complete evidence package. After watching Clara's increasingly frantic attempts to reach someone, anyone who might help her salvage this situation, we saw her throw her phone across the car's interior in frustrated rage and put her head in her hands like someone who just realized they were completely alone. "Almost feel sorry for her," Ivy said. "Almost." Clara finally started her car and drove away, tires squealing as she took the corner too fast. One taillight was flickering erratically, probably damaged when she'd hit a curb in her panic to get home and regain control of a situation that had been out of her control for weeks. My phone rang almost immediately. Unknown number with a local area code that I recognized as belonging to the expensive part of town, where successful attorneys and business executives lived. "Ethan, this is Julia Foster. I'm Daniel's wife, and I think we need to meet as soon as possible. I have information you're going to want to see, and I suspect you have evidence that will be very useful to me." I met Julia Foster at Morrison's Cafe on Thursday morning at precisely 9 o'clock. She had chosen a corner booth with clear sightlines to all entrances, her back to the wall, like someone who understood the value of controlling her environment. She was exactly what I had expected. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Everything about her screaming, successful attorney who didn't lose cases or tolerate being lied to. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice," she said as I sat down across from her, noting that she had already ordered coffee and was reviewing documents like someone who had been preparing for this meeting since dawn. "Your husband's been sleeping with my wife for 8 months, I replied. "I figure we have quite a bit to discuss." Julia slid a thick leather folder across the table with the kind of precision that suggested she had been planning this moment for weeks. "I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago after I found evidence that Daniel was hiding significant financial transactions from me. He's very thorough and very expensive, but he gets results that hold up in court." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop, even though I thought I had prepared myself for what I might see. Clara and Daniel holding hands outside restaurants I couldn't afford on my security technician salary. Kissing in parking garages like teenagers. Entering hotel rooms together with the familiarity of people who had done this many times before. Shopping for jewelry at stores where a single bracelet cost more than I made in a month. My wife looked genuinely happy in these photographs, laughing and smiling in ways I hadn't seen in our house for over 2 years. She looked like a woman in love, which might have been touching if the man she was in love with wasn't married to someone else and funding their relationship with money that belonged to his family. "How long have you known?" I asked, studying a photograph of Clara laughing at something Daniel had said while they shared an expensive dessert at some upscale bistro I'd never heard of. "Officially since March, when I found a receipt for women's lingerie that I'd never seen Clara wear. Expensive lingerie from a boutique that specializes in items for special occasions. Unofficially, Daniel's been acting strange since Christmas. New cologne, working late, business trips that didn't match his official calendar, sudden interest in fitness, and expensive clothes." I showed Julia the evidence I'd collected over the past months. Hotel receipts with company credit card numbers clearly visible. Text messages between Clara and Daniel discussing their future together in detail. GPS logs from Clara's car showing regular visits to his office, his neighborhood, and hotels across 3 different counties. We spent the next hour comparing timelines, cross-referencing dates, and building a case that would hold up in any court of law. The pattern was absolutely clear. This wasn't a casual affair or a moment of weakness that had gotten out of hand. This was a planned, sustained relationship involving fraud, embezzlement, and coordinated lies to multiple victims over an extended period of time. "Your wife told Daniel that you were abusive," Julia said, pulling out a small digital recording device that looked expensive and professional. "She told you that directly?" "She called our house Tuesday night, about 20 minutes after you sent those messages that panicked her. Said you'd threatened her physically, that she was afraid to go home alone, that she needed Daniel's help finding a safe place to stay until she could figure out how to handle what she called your escalating violence." I laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. Clara's 5'3" and weighs maybe 120 soaking wet. She's never seen me raise my voice above normal conversation level. The most violent thing I've ever done in front of her is kill a spider with a rolled-up magazine. I figured as much. When someone's actually afraid of domestic violence, they don't tell elaborate, detailed stories about their abuser. They just run and ask for help later. Julia pulled out another set of documents that made my blood pressure spike when I realized what I was looking at. Bank statements showing electronic transfers from Daniel's personal checking account to Clara's account. $53,000 over 7 months, labeled as consulting fees and marketing expenses for services that had never been performed. He was funding her entire lifestyle, Julia said, her voice carrying the kind of cold anger that comes from discovering systematic betrayal. Designer clothes, spa treatments, that BMW she drives, the expensive jewelry she wears to work events, all gifts from my husband, purchased with money from our joint savings account. using your children's college funds to buy gifts for his mistress, using our retirement savings, our emergency fund, our kids' education money, the inheritance from my grandmother. Daniel systematically cleaned out accounts we'd been building for 15 years to fund a lifestyle that made his mistress look successful and sophisticated. We sat in silence for several minutes. Two people who'd been betrayed by the same elaborate deception, studying evidence of how thoroughly our spouses had been deceiving not just us, but everyone around them. "What do you want to do about it?" I asked. Julia smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had decided that polite, private divorce proceedings were insufficient for the level of humiliation and financial damage she had suffered. "I want them to face consequences, real ones, public ones, the kind that follow you for years and affect every job interview, every loan application, every time someone Google searches your name." She explained her plan with the kind of methodical detail that made it clear she had been thinking about this for weeks. Daniel's company was hosting their annual charity gala next Saturday night at the Riverside Hotel. 500 guests, including major clients, business partners, city council members, and local media representatives. Clara would undoubtedly be there as Daniel's marketing consultant, probably wearing another expensive dress he'd bought her with Julia's money. "I can get you in," Julia said, "as my guest. Daniel won't suspect anything because I attend these events every year as his wife, and he's been so focused on Clara lately that he stopped paying attention to what I'm doing." "What do you have in mind?" "You install security systems for a living. I assume that includes audio and video equipment." I nodded. Daniel's giving the keynote speech about corporate responsibility and family values, something about how successful businesses are built on trust and integrity, and maintaining the highest ethical standards. I think the audience would be very interested in seeing what those values look like when applied to his personal life. We spent the next 3 hours planning every detail with the precision of a military operation. Julia would handle the guest list, the seating arrangements, and gaining access to the hotel's audio-visual system. I would provide the technical equipment and operate the presentation. We'd coordinate everything through encrypted messaging apps and burner phones, treating this like the psychological warfare it essentially was. "There's one more thing you should know," Julia said as we prepared to leave. "Your wife's been escalating her demands over the past week. She's moved beyond asking for money and emotional support to making explicit threats about what happens if Daniel doesn't leave me for her. Blackmail, she calls it. Helping him see what's really important in life. I call it extortion." Julia handed me the recording device she'd been using. She called our house again yesterday morning while Daniel was at work. "Listen to this." Clara's voice came through the speaker, sweet and threatening at the same time, like poisoned honey. "Daniel needs to make a decision, Julia. Either he files for divorce by Friday and commits publicly to building a real future with me, or I tell everyone about our relationship, including his business partners, his clients, and your children." She doesn't know about Saturday's event yet. Julia said she will soon. I'm going to invite her personally and make sure she understands this is her chance to go public with their relationship. I drove home thinking about Clara's rapid escalation from adultery to fraud to extortion in less than 3 months. My wife, who couldn't successfully negotiate a restaurant bill without getting flustered and asking for help, was now threatening a businessman worth $8 million and his attorney wife. The house felt empty when I arrived. Not just quiet, but hollow. Clara had been back while I was meeting with Julia, taking most of her clothes, her jewelry, and anything else she could carry in 2 large suitcases. She'd left behind the wedding photos, the anniversary gifts, and any pretense that our marriage had been real or meaningful to her. But she'd also left behind her backup laptop, the one she thought I didn't know about because she kept it in a locked file cabinet in the spare bedroom. The one containing emails, financial records, and evidence of activities that would interest both the IRS and her former employer's fraud investigation department. My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "We need to talk immediately. This has gone too far, and innocent people are getting hurt." I replied, Saturday. Morrison's Cafe, 7 p.m. Why Saturday? Why not right now when we can still fix this? Because Saturday night, you'll understand exactly how far this has actually gone. I spent the rest of the week preparing for what Julia and I had planned. We tested audio equipment, synchronized video files, and rehearsed our timing until we could execute the plan without thinking about it. By Friday afternoon, everything was ready. Clara had absolutely no idea what was coming for her. Neither did Daniel. The Riverside Hotel ballroom looked like something from a Hollywood political thriller. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light over white tablecloths and silver centerpieces. 500 people in formal evening wear pretending to care passionately about local charities while actually networking for business deals that would be worth millions over the coming year. I stood in the back corner near the professional audio-visual control booth, wearing a rented tuxedo and operating equipment that Julia had arranged for me to access through her connections on the charity's organizing committee. She'd introduced me to the event coordinator as her technical consultant, someone helping with the presentation software for Daniel's keynote speech about corporate responsibility. Clara arrived at exactly 7:30, 15 minutes late as always, wearing a red silk dress that probably cost more than I made in 2 weeks, installing security systems for paranoid rich people. She walked into the ballroom with Daniel like they owned the entire hotel, smiling and shaking hands with business leaders who had no idea they were looking at two people who'd been systematically lying to everyone for months. She looks confident, Julia observed, appearing beside me in a midnight blue gown that matched her husband's tuxedo perfectly. Every inch the successful attorney's wife. She always does right before she realizes she's been outplayed. Daniel worked the room like a seasoned politician, introducing Clara as his marketing director to people who controlled millions in potential contracts. Clara played her part perfectly, charming and professional, giving no hint that she was unemployed, facing potential fraud charges, and blackmailing her lover for money and marriage. The irony was absolutely delicious. Here were two people whose entire relationship was built on elaborate lies and financial fraud, presenting themselves as pillars of the business community to an audience that valued integrity and ethical behavior above everything else. Ladies and gentlemen, the event coordinator announced at exactly 8 o'clock, please welcome Daniel Foster, CEO of Foster Development Group, who will be speaking tonight about corporate responsibility in the modern business environment. Daniel Lusty took the stage to polite applause, looking completely comfortable under the bright lights in his expensive suit and perfect haircut, preparing to deliver a speech about business ethics that he'd probably given dozens of times to audiences who had no idea what kind of man they were actually listening to. Thank you all for being here tonight, Daniel began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom's sound system. At Foster Development Group, we believe that successful businesses are built on an unshakable foundation of trust, integrity, and family values. These aren't just words we put on our website. They're the principles that guide every decision we make, every contract we sign, every relationship we build. The audience nodded approvingly, business leaders and community members who had built their own success on similar principles. Clara beamed from her table near the front, probably imagining herself as the future Mrs. Foster, presiding over events like this for years to come, as the wife of a respected businessman. Tonight, I'd like to share with you a multimedia presentation about the values that guide our company and our unwavering commitment to the community we're privileged to serve. Daniel continued, with the smooth confidence of someone who had never faced serious opposition. This was my cue. I switched on the projector and started the slideshow Julia and I had prepared with obsessive attention to detail. The first few slides showed Daniel's company logo, mission statement, and examples of their charitable work in the community. Normal corporate presentation material that made the audience settle back in their chairs, expecting 20 minutes of typical business rhetoric. Then the slides changed. Slide 4. A high-resolution photograph of Daniel and Clara entering the Marriott Hotel together, holding hands like lovers. Date stamp clearly visible in the bottom right corner. March 15th, 2:30 p.m. The audience murmured like a distant storm approaching. A few people leaned forward in their seats, trying to understand what they were seeing. Clara's face went white as she recognized the photograph and realized what was happening. Slide 5. Daniel and Clara kissing passionately in the parking garage behind his office building, her hands tangled in his hair. Date stamp: April 3rd, 12:45 p.m. The murmurs got louder, spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. People started turning in their seats, looking for Clara in the crowd, connecting the woman at table 6 with the woman in the photographs being projected 20 feet tall behind the podium. Daniel stopped talking mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the images of his affair being broadcast to 500 people who controlled his professional reputation. What is this? This isn't my presentation. Someone stop this immediately. Technical difficulties, I called out from the back of the room in a calm, helpful voice. Just a moment, sir. We'll have this sorted out. Slide 6. A hotel receipt showing charges for champagne room service and a luxury suite. Company credit card number clearly visible at the bottom, along with Daniel's signature, authorizing personal charges to corporate accounts. The ballroom erupted in shocked conversations, cameras flashing as society reporters realized they were witnessing a major scandal. Business partners pulling out phones to document what they were seeing for their own protection. Turn it off. Daniel grabbed the microphone, but his voice cracked with panic and desperation. This is sabotage. Someone is trying to destroy my reputation. Slide 7. A bank statement showing electronic transfers totaling $53,000 from Daniel's personal account to an account belonging to Clara Pierce. Description line reading, consulting fees and marketing expenses for services rendered. Clara bolted from her chair like someone had fired a gun, knocking over a wine glass that shattered on the marble floor with a sound that carried through the suddenly quiet ballroom. But Julia was waiting by the main exit, flanked by 2 hotel security guards who'd been briefed on the situation and were prepared to prevent anyone from leaving until this presentation was complete. Leaving so soon? Julia asked, her voice carrying across the room in the sudden quiet that had fallen over 500 shocked guests. This is harassment, Clara said, her voice shaking with panic and rage. This is a coordinated attack. You can't do this to us. We have rights. This is evidence, Julia replied, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear clearly. Evidence of adultery, embezzlement, fraud, and extortion. I triggered the final slide, an audio file that began playing through the ballroom's professional sound system with crystal clear quality. Clara's voice filled the room like a confession. Daniel needs to make a decision, Julia. Either he files for divorce by Friday and commits publicly to building a real future with me, or I tell everyone about our relationship, including his business partners, his clients, and your children. I'm not going to wait forever for him to choose what's really important. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of Clara's recorded voice threatening to destroy a man's family unless he abandoned them for her. 500 people listening to a woman essentially blackmailing a businessman in front of his wife, threatening to use their affair as a weapon against his livelihood and his children's security. Then someone started laughing. A harsh, bitter sound from one of Daniel's major business partners, who had apparently just realized how thoroughly he'd been deceived by someone he'd trusted with millions in contracts. Then someone else joined in with the kind of laughter that comes from recognizing absurd audacity. Within seconds, half the ballroom was laughing at the woman who'd tried to extort money and marriage from a married businessman, while stealing from his family and lying to her own husband about everything from her work schedule to her financial needs. Clara looked around the room with growing horror, realizing that everyone who mattered in our small coastal town now knew exactly what she'd been doing for months. Business leaders, community organizers, society reporters, charity board members, people who controlled jobs, social standing, and reputation in ways that would follow her for years. You're all witnesses, she said desperately, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. Ethan planned this attack. He's obsessed with destroying me because he can't accept that our marriage is over. He's trying to ruin my life out of spite. Really? Julia pulled out her phone and played another recording for the room to hear. Because according to this voicemail you left yesterday morning, you're the one making threats. Clara's voice again, even clearer this time. If Daniel doesn't leave Julia by Sunday and make a public commitment to our future together, I'm sending copies of our private photos to every client his company works with. I'm sure they'll be very interested in knowing what kind of man they're doing business with and whether they can trust him with their money. The laughter stopped completely. This wasn't funny anymore. This was a woman threatening to use intimate photos as weapons against someone's livelihood and professional reputation, essentially admitting to possessing what amounted to blackmail material. Daniel was escorted off the stage by hotel security, while several business partners were already pulling out their phones, probably calling lawyers or accountants or board members to discuss immediate damage control and contract reviews. Clara ran toward the service exit, pushing through tables and knocking over chairs in her panic to escape. I followed her outside to the hotel's loading dock area where she couldn't run any further. "You destroyed everything!" she screamed when she saw me, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "My job, my reputation, my future, my relationship, everything I worked for over the past 5 years. I exposed everything. I corrected everything you chose to hide while lying to people who trusted you. No one will hire me now. No one will trust me. You've completely ruined my life over something that was never about you. Your life was ruined the moment you decided that lying to everyone who cared about you was easier than being honest about what you wanted." Clara got in her car and drove away without another word, tires squealing as she took the corner too fast, and disappeared into the night. I watched her taillights vanish, knowing this was absolutely the last time I'd see her as my wife. Julia appeared beside me in the loading dock, still looking elegant despite everything that had just happened. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I can finally breathe again." We walked back inside to find the charity gala continuing without Daniel and Clara. People were eating dinner, making small talk, and donating money to worthy causes. By the end of the night, most guests were discussing quarterly earnings reports and vacation plans rather than the scandal they'd witnessed. But the reporters were still there taking notes and asking questions about what they'd observed. "This will be in tomorrow's business section," Julia said. "Good. Let everyone know what happens when you try to build success on elaborate lies." I helped Julia pack up the audio-visual equipment while hotel staff cleaned up the broken glass and rearranged the tables Clara had knocked over during her escape. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go back to our lives. Better lives. Honest lives. Lives where we don't have to wonder what our spouses are really doing when they claim to be working late." Julia smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all evening. "Thank you for helping me see who my husband really was. Thank you for helping me prove who my wife really was." I drove home alone through empty streets, feeling lighter than I had in months. Clara was waiting in my driveway when I got home at 12:30 in the morning. She sat in her BMW with the engine running and the headlights pointed at our house, staring at the building we'd shared for 4 years, like she was trying to memorize every detail before it disappeared forever. When she saw my headlights sweep across her car, she got out and walked toward me with the careful, deliberate steps of someone who'd been drinking, but was trying very hard not to show it. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "There's nothing left to talk about." "Please, 5 minutes." After 4 years of marriage and everything we've been through together, I deserve 5 minutes. I unlocked the front door and let her follow me inside one last time. The house felt different now, like a museum of a life that had never been real. Every photograph on the walls, every piece of furniture we'd chosen together, Every shared memory had been contaminated by months of lies and systematic betrayal. Clara sat on the couch where she used to watch reality TV shows and complain about coworkers whose problems seemed insignificant compared to what we were dealing with now. She looked small and defeated. Nothing like the confident woman who'd walked into the charity gala 5 hours ago, expecting to be treated like royalty. "Everyone knows," she said. "Yes. My mother won't return my calls. My college friends are asking questions I can't answer. Daniel blocked my number and changed the locks on his office. His wife is filing for divorce and demanding half of everything he owns." I poured myself a glass of water and sat in my leather chair, the one she'd always hated because it didn't match her vision of how our living room should look. "What did you expect?" "I expected us to handle this privately, like adults, like people who used to love each other and shared a life together." "You mean like when you handled your affair privately?" "By lying to me for 8 months, stealing money from Daniel's family, using your sister's identity to cover your tracks, and blackmailing your lover when he didn't move fast enough to suit your timeline." Clara started crying. Not the manipulative tears she used during arguments to make me feel guilty for asking reasonable questions, but genuine sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. Her mascara was already ruined from the earlier confrontation, and now fresh tears carved new tracks through the smeared makeup. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said between sobs that made her whole body shake. "Which part? The affair? The lies? The fraud? Or the blackmail? Any of it? All of it?" "I was lonely. Ethan, you work constantly. We never talk anymore about anything meaningful. We live like roommates instead of husband and wife. I felt invisible in my own marriage." "So, you decided to fix our marriage by sleeping with someone else. I decided to find someone who made me feel alive again, someone who listened to me when I talked, who made me feel special and wanted and beautiful, instead of like a burden or an obligation." I studied her face, looking for traces of the woman I'd married 6 years ago, in a ceremony that had felt like the beginning of something important. She was still there, underneath the expensive makeup and the designer clothes Daniel had bought her with his wife's money. But she felt like a stranger, like someone I'd known in another lifetime when I was younger and more trusting. "Do you love him?" I asked. Clara wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse, leaving streaks of black mascara on the white paper. "I thought I did." "But you don't." "I don't know anymore." After tonight, after seeing how quickly he threw me away when his reputation was threatened, after watching him pretend he barely knew me when 500 people were staring at evidence of our relationship, I don't know anything anymore. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have. "These are divorce papers. Sign them tonight and this ends as quietly as possible. Refuse, and everything becomes public record in family court, where reporters can access it freely and use it in newspaper articles." Clara took the envelope with hands that were still shaking from adrenaline and alcohol, and the realization that her life had fundamentally changed in ways she couldn't undo. "What about the house?" "Sold. Proceeds split 50-50, minus your half of the money you'll need to pay back to Daniel's family for the fraud and embezzlement." "What about my things?" "Pack whatever you can carry in your car tonight. The rest goes to charity or gets sold to cover legal expenses and the debt you owe." "Where am I supposed to live? I don't have a job anymore. No one will hire me after tonight. My reputation is destroyed." "That's not my problem. Clara, you made choices that led to consequences. This is what consequences look like." Clara opened the envelope and read through the divorce papers with the attention of someone who'd lost the right to negotiate or make demands. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the document steady enough to read the legal language that would officially end our marriage. "This is really it, isn't it? 4 years of marriage, 6 years together total. And this is how it ends." "This ended the moment you decided Daniel Foster was more important than the vows you made to me, and the life we'd built together. She found a pen in her purse and signed the papers without reading them completely. Like someone surrendering after a war, they'd never had any chance of winning from the beginning. "For what it's worth," Clara said as she handed me the signed documents, "I am sorry. Not just about getting caught, not just about the consequences, but about all of it. About hurting you, about lying to Ivy, about becoming someone I don't recognize when I look in the mirror. I know you are. You're sorry it happened this way. You're sorry you got exposed. You're sorry you lost control of the situation and couldn't manage the outcome. No, I mean really sorry. Sorry for hurting people who trusted me and cared about me. Sorry for throwing away something real and stable for something that was never going to last." I looked at her carefully, trying to decide if this was genuine remorse or just another manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for exposing her lies. With Clara, it had always been difficult to tell the difference between authentic emotion and strategic performance. "Maybe you are sorry," I said finally, "but being sorry doesn't undo the damage you caused. It doesn't give me back the months I spent wondering what was wrong with me, what I'd done to make you so distant and cold and dishonest." Clara stood up slowly and walked toward the front door, like someone leaving a funeral. She stopped in the hallway and looked back at the house one last time, taking in the photos of our wedding, the furniture we'd picked out together when we thought we were building something permanent, the life we'd created before she decided to destroy it. "I loved you, Ethan. Maybe not the way you deserved. Maybe not enough to keep me from making terrible choices. But I did love you." I know. That's what makes this so sad. She left without saying goodbye, walking to her car like someone in a dream. I watched through the window as she sat there for several minutes, probably making phone calls to friends or family members who might let her stay with them until she figured out what came next. Finally, she started the engine and drove away into the night. This time, I knew it was forever. The house was completely quiet again. I sat in my chair and looked around at the remnants of our shared life, already planning how I would pack everything and start over somewhere new. Tomorrow, I would call a real estate agent. Next week, I would put the house on the market. Within a month, I would move to a different city and begin building a life based on honesty instead of lies. My phone buzzed with a text from Ivy. "Saw the news coverage online. Local reporter posted photos from the charity gala. How are you holding up?" I replied. "It's over. Finally, completely over." "Are you okay?" "I will be. For the first time in months, I actually believe that's true." I turned off all the lights and went upstairs to sleep in a bed that felt different now that I wasn't sharing it with someone who'd been lying to me about everything that mattered. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork and the logistics of disentangling a life I'd shared with someone who'd never really been sharing it with me. But tonight, I would sleep better than I had since this nightmare began. Clara had wanted space, so I gave her miles. She had wanted freedom, so I gave her everything that came with it. She had wanted to disappear from our marriage without consequences, so I helped her disappear from everything else, too. The silence was perfect.